There have been over 5 million babies born using IVF since the procedure was introduced in 1978. The ethical debate surrounding the procedure has been effectively settled at this point, so much so, in fact, that sperm and egg donations for IVF treatment are now a major export for the United States. But how does this market operate, and why is the United States such an attractive trading partner when it comes to these essential building blocks of life? Joining us to discuss today this topic, we have Amanda Siegel, internal patient liaison at Shady Grove Fertility Center, Scott Brown, communications director at California Cryobank, and Marna Gatlin, the founder and CEO of Parents Via Eggs Donation. Thanks, guys, for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks. So I want to just bring up this fascinating article, also the great graphic from The Verge. Come and get it, how sperm became one of America's hottest exports. And I just love this graphic here. It kind of tells you everything you need to know. Scott, I want to start with you. Just tell me, give us a sort of walkthrough. How does somebody become a sperm donor? What are sort of the processes behind becoming one?
It's a pretty straightforward process that takes into account family medical history, educational background, physical characteristics, skills, attributes, pretty much anything you can think of to try and describe a person, we look at. And if the donor applicant is qualified enough, obviously, and STD testing, genetic testing, almost anything you can think of, if he qualifies, he can get onto our catalog. Now, that's less than 1% of total applicants actually make it through the screening process. It's a really difficult challenge, as we like to say, and the guys that make it through are highly qualified and are actually very generous and altruistic individuals who want to make the world a better place by helping people start families.
They want to make the world a better place, but they also get paid for it as well, don't they? This isn't just giving the gift for free. There's a price tag attached, right?
There is a compensation component to the whole process, but it's a lot of poking and prodding and blood draws, and we really put these guys through a lot. They have to go home and talk to their families about 3 generations of family medical history and what their aunt died of and their grandmother and grandfather. And so it takes a lot of work. The actual donation process is not horrible, but everything that leads up to it and all the background work that they have to do actually is a pretty tough challenge.
And how do you actually go about recruiting people? I mean, I suppose when you typically hear about sperm donors, you think about college kids, like, younger people just sort of looking to make what ostensibly is a quick buck. If you're a guy, certainly donating sperm, it's not too much of a chore. So how do you go about recruiting people, and also recruiting people with this sort of desirable percentile, the people that make it through the screening process?
So traditionally, the majority of sperm donors were college students looking to make money while they were still in school. That's changed a little bit in the last few years. The majority of our recruiting now goes through Craigslist and Facebook ads. And we're still looking at major university cities, but mostly larger cities with a large postgraduate population of young men who haven't actually gotten their careers completely in full bloom yet. So I'd say about 40% of our donors are still current college students, and the rest are college graduates who are trying to do something good for the world while making a little bit of money on the side.
Marna, I want to bring you in here because we've just been talking about the relative ease, at least with the donation process is concerned anyway, for a man to donate sperm, although that there are these sort of like strings attached in order to be able to become one of the viable sperm donors. But it's a little bit of a different story for women and egg donation, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's really different for women in egg donation. It's much more invasive, much more invasive.
So, I mean, just walk us through the process of becoming an egg donor. What are the steps? If a woman wants to become an egg donor, is it a case of sort of simply finding the right clinic and just popping along and slotting in a time and then just having them harvested, or how does it work?
No. An egg donor would apply to a clinic or an agency. She would go through a physical testing, as Scott says, lots of blood work, a lot of medical appointments. She would have a psychological evaluation conducted, as well as, many interviews. And then once she's brought into a pool, so to speak, she has to wait until she's selected. And then once she's selected, there's many more hoops to jump through. I mean, there's lots of medication to be taken. There's injections to be taken. It's highly a highly choreographed process. And then, of course, there's retrieval, which is a surgery. It's a surgical procedure that egg donors go to sleep for, and the eggs that they are follicles, rather, that they've been growing over the past many weeks during their medication protocol are harvested or extracted. And then, of course, they are joined with sperm in the laboratory, and embryos are created, and those embryos are placed back, into the recipient mother, and, we really hope a pregnancy occurs. So that's kind of how it is.
And in your experience, I mean, Scott was saying earlier that a lot of the men that want to do this are sort of interested in kind of giving back and helping out, where people, couples that can't have children, and kind of like offering their fluids as a service, if you will, so that something beautiful and life-giving can come out of this. Is it the same for the women who donate eggs? Or because, as I understand it, there is a greater financial incentive, like the money to give away your eggs is substantially more than to donate your sperm, isn't it?
Well, yeah. When we talk about this, we say that the guys get the better end of the deal because it feels good to donate sperm, where donating eggs, it doesn't feel so great. So the compensation for an egg donor is higher because the process is longer and it's, invasive. And, I would say that the majority of egg donors I speak to on a regular basis are incredibly helpful and wanting to help. And, I think it's only fair that they be compensated for their time and their inconvenience. And, I'll go out on a limb and say pain and suffering, because, even though they're asleep, retrieval is not really fun. So, yeah, they want to help, but I think it's only fair that they're compensated for what they're giving as well.
I'd love to jump in here if I can.
Yeah, please do, Amanda. You're at Shady Grove Fertility, and I've got the site here up for everybody to check out as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd love to jump in and just add my 2 cents. I think what Mana has so eloquently said is exactly it. But I do think that when a young woman decides to donate her egg, while I will absolutely, and we love Scott's donors, and we thank God every day that there's sperm donors out there too, I do think that the process of egg donation is one that is, far more invasive for the young woman deciding to do this. So compensation is much higher. Donors get paid on average anywhere from about $5,500 to, as much as $10,000. I think it's important to look at the national average, and I think it's important to determine, where the donor is located and the services that she's providing. But a pretty decent fee for an egg donor would be about $6,500 for going through this process. At Shady Grove, I'll be quite honest, we will not take a donor that is compensated through an agency any more than $10,000. So 10,000 would be the absolute maximum of anybody that we would use. But we do have an internal database at Shady Grove. We screen our donors. And again, just taking what Mana said and just elaborating a little bit, there is no question that the women doing this process are incredibly altruistic. And it is, as I said, an invasive process, and to have to be prodded and pricked and had your blood drawn and do the scans that they have to do, and then ultimately have those eggs harvested with really no gratification at the end of the day, does take a very special young woman. So
but one of the things that you were sort of just mentioning, and that it would be great if you could clarify, is this idea that you won't accept anybody who's been compensated by a third party for anything above $10,000. Can you just explain where these sort of like third party kind of groups come in? Break that down for us.
So there are really 3 choices that a patient has when they're looking at moving forward with egg donation. They can either work with a clinic that has an internal database that they can work, and that means that the clinic actually screens the donors themselves and has the list available for the recipients to pick from. The second choice would be working with an agency. And we tend to find the agencies incredibly helpful for our more diverse and ethnic type donors. We have a really hard time at Shady Grove finding Asian donors. So your Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Indian donors are very hard to find. Culturally, it's not something that's widely accepted. An Indian parent would be almost mortified if they knew that their daughter was donating their eggs. So we look to a more specialized group that will help us try and find those donors. And then thirdly, which has really become, and I do believe it's going to become the future, is using an egg bank. Donors that eggs have already been frozen. So the donor cycles through a clinic, her eggs get frozen, and she's actually part of a donor egg bank, which kind of leads into where Scott comes into it with the sperm banks, where you can, call up a sperm bank and find a donor through them. The sperm's already been frozen, the donor's been tested. Everybody knows that it's a kosher process.
One of the things I'd want to sort of jump in, obviously, there's like a moral element to this discussion that perhaps we haven't really got into yet. And it's one that, some of the commenters, the people that are watching this segment now are kind of getting into a little bit. KDR Community, who's been commenting, says this segment is a giant advertisement for the fertility industry. They are loving this. They're making an absolute insane amounts of money on eggs and sperm, and there is no national standard in the US. So two things about that, really. One, let's talk about... Well,
it's not true.
But one, let's talk about standards. And two, let's talk about this notion of the commodification of and how some people find that slightly difficult to kind of take, like the idea that couples who are infertile perhaps don't become patients when they're looking for donors, they become clients. There's a selection process, that the industry has somehow become, there's been a commodification of it. So, how do you kind of like pick through the weeds of the morals of this?
Well, I would say that life is a selection process. When a husband and wife meet and decide to start a relationship and eventually have children, they're choosing criteria based on what they find attractive in the other person. So when an individual or couple is going to be using a sperm donor or an egg donor, there's no reason that I can think of to say why they shouldn't have a choice in who that donor is going to be. Is going to be a biological parent to their child. To say that it's a straight commodity and to assume that a healthy couple is actually choosing a donor or a sperm donor or an egg donor because they want to improve their child somehow is absurd. It just doesn't happen. So when you come to a sperm bank like California Cryo Bank or an egg bank, you have to come in with some notion of what you're looking for. Otherwise, you would just be picking out of a hat. So that can come down to ethnic background to match one of the parents. It can come down to eye color, hair color type characteristics. It can come down to interests. If you are hoping that your child will be an athlete because you are an athlete or a musician or love art. I mean, all those things come into play in one level or another. There's the whole nature versus nurture argument. And I think it's absurd to think that people wouldn't want to take that criteria into account when choosing a donor.
I can totally understand the public out there thinking that this is a commodity. I want to make it very clear, though, that the donors that certainly we use as a clinic, the compensation that those donors get is exactly what the couple is paying them directly. So the clinic is not making any profit out of the payment and fee to the donor. The donor is getting paid exactly what the couple is paying them, and the clinic does not make any fee with that being said. But let's just step back for 1 second and think about that recipient couple that needs the sperm donor or needs the egg donor, exactly what Scott's just said. There are, thousands of people out there that the only choice they have, and believe you me, it's not an easy decision. When a patient has to give up the rights of using their own eggs, it's a grieving process. That patient goes through so much turmoil in making that decision to give up that genetic link, to now have to take on an egg donor to create their family. And I have to say, being on the recipient side of things, where I work primarily with the recipients looking for those egg and sperm donors, hearing the amazing stories of those patients that then come back to me after the fact and say, Amanda, you've changed our lives. You've created a it's interesting to hear when somebody has not been through infertility, and I am one of those people that have been through infertility. I have 3 children through the infertility process, and I thank God every day for being given that opportunity. It does kind of anger me a little bit that folks will sit out there and say, oh, these clinics are just out there to make money. Yes, it's an expensive process, no question, and I won't deny that. But I think one of the things that we did at Shady Grove was create a money-back program, give folks the ability to do this with the understanding that if they were not successful, they would get 100% of their money back.
Actually, let's just before I kind of let you carry on there, Amanda, I just want to stop and ask. Let's like break a couple of things down that you've just said. First of all, you just mentioned your own personal story. So, if you don't mind, just explaining a little bit about your own process. So, tell us like how difficult was it for you to conceive, and how many times did you go through an IVF process? What was your story?
So my story was a little bit different in that I was younger when I went through the process. So I was fortunate enough to be able to use my own eggs and my husband's sperm. But we discovered, early on, we got married young, and for 4 years we immigrated. As you can hear from my accent, I'm not originally from America. So
we're all friends of people with accents here. It's fine.
Immigrated to the US, and for the first 4 years didn't even try. Ironically, I started working at Shady Grove, having just immigrated. So it was just very ironic that 4 years into it, started to panic just a little bit when I saw everybody around me going through infertility treatment. We did have to go through IVF. So our only choice was to be able to go through IVF using my eggs and my husband's sperm. But again, just being able to being offered this this treatment of infertility was remarkable. We went through 2 cycles. My twins are going to be 17. So, this is a long time ago. I can't believe that I'm old enough to have 17-year-olds, but I have, and then decided 7 years later that I wasn't done and wanted to go through the process all over again. I teased my husband and said, I need a refresher course for my patients to be able to tell them what to do. So now that I'm 43, I am trying to slip in the donor egg thing and say to him every now and again, maybe it's time for us to have another one, but he's not buying. So 3 is what we'll end up with.
And unlike Amanda, I do have a child via egg donation. And so as a parent who had to, exchange her genetics for somebody else's, I think it's incredibly important to, remember as a parent, it can be pretty overwhelming thinking that you need to embrace somebody else's genetics because you can't use your own. In my case, I was brave enough to think outside the box, and we had a sense of humor about it. And I thought, well, for heaven's sakes, I'm very short. I'm 5'3". I've been a shrimp all my life. And so now I have the opportunity to find an egg donor who's very tall. And I did. And I have a boy who's, over 6 feet tall and 12. And I think it's great. So, I most certainly don't look at donors as commodities. I look at them as amazing young women who are very giving, and I think who should be compensated fairly. I can tell you, because I deal with thousands and thousands of patients every day, that the fertility clinics don't make any profit on any compensation that a donor is compensated for. I mean, that is between the parent and the egg donor. And so this process is expensive. And unfortunately, within the United States, majority of the insurance companies and states don't provide infertility insurance. And until they do, it's going to continue to be, expensive. I have parents that have put second mortgages on their home, have taken second jobs, have sold extra cars, just to try to have the opportunity to have a baby. So
I think you're raising a really interesting point, which is that it doesn't make a difference, I suppose, how much progress we've made in society. There are still some fundamentals that that men and women and couples across the board kind of want, and children is one of them. It's a very emotive subject. Infertility is a very emotive subject, and with women being able to have it all and careers and all sorts, there's still a fundamental desire, I suppose, amongst a lot of women to have children. One of the things that we sort of haven't touched upon yet that I really want to is this money back guarantee concept, and maybe you can just explain a little bit, Amanda, as to what that is, and then I want to get on to why US sperm in particular is so desirable across the world.
So I'll lead on to both, and I appreciate you for bringing that up, because I think, unfortunately, there aren't enough clinics that offer something like what we do at Shady Grove. But the money back program basically was ingenious. We recognized that while success rates were excellent at Shady Grove, they weren't 100%. A patient going through this process is not guaranteed of being pregnant on their very first cycle. Averages, statistically, 62% clinical pregnancy and about a 50% delivery rate on the patient's first try. We believe, though, that 85% of our patients will deliver a baby within their first 3 tries. We felt so confident about that we said to folks, you know what, we'll put our money where our mouth is. We will share the financial risk with you. We'll charge you a premium. You'll pay more than you would for just 1 cycle, but we'll give you the ability to do multiple tries. And if you are unsuccessful and do not, and the operative word here is deliver a baby, you will get your money back 100%. And it is an absolute incredible way for a patient who's probably, by the time they get to donor egg, has spent a pretty fortune, because most folks have already been through IVF using their own eggs, been unsuccessul, and now have to look at donor egg. So they really are at the point where you don't want to throw good money in after bad. By giving them this financial safety net to fall into, it allows them to now look at egg donation as an alternative, knowing that if they were not successful, they would be able to get 100% of their money back.
I mean, do you ever reach a point where you advise, your clients that this is probably the end of the road for them? That there is no, that there's got to, is there a maximum to how much you can either put your body through or put your wallet through?
Absolutely, absolutely, and we're very conscious of that. So by monitoring them really carefully up to the point of egg donation, but remember it again, Mana's a perfect example of that. It is a very hard road to cross when you have to get to the donor egg. So a lot of women don't want to justify moving to that point. We have a strict age cutoff. So beyond 43, beyond 44, a patient would have to look at donor egg if they were looking at moving forward, unless there was an infertility diagnosis of premature ovarian reserve. So if a 38-year-old is coming to us with, a poor ovarian reserve, egg donation would be the option for them.
Right. But so you do advise, you do kind of give some sort of guidelines and things. Well, we're nearly out of time, so I just want to get through a couple of topics while I have the three of you here. So, Scott, this is an article. It's on HuffPost World. Australian town forced to import sperm from the US. This is the Australian city of Townsville facing a drastic shortage of sperm a couple of years ago that ended up paying $700 for an ampule of American sperm, according to the Herald Sun. So what is it about American sperm that's like, I don't know, the Veuve Clicquot of sperm or the Cristal of sperm? Like, what is it about American sperm that is like, the creme de la creme, if you pardon the pun?
It puts the white and red, white and blue. I think it's number one is availability. The fact that we have a very vibrant sperm donor program in the United States, not just California Cryobank, but other national banks as well. It's availability factor. We do, despite what the commenter mentioned about a lack of regulatory coverage in the U.S. That's not true. There are regulatory agencies that oversee sperm banking. Our testing standards are higher than anywhere else in the country. Our specimen quality standards are higher than anywhere else in the country. And our availability is higher than anywhere else in the country. That's a result of compensation. We do pay sperm donors. Many countries don't. We do allow for anonymous sperm donors. Many countries don't.
That's right. The UK and Canada in 2005, when they revoked anonymity for sperm donors, they saw donations plummet.
Absolutely.
But
the result of that is that you now have Canadian citizens coming over the border into the U.S. to be inseminated and then returning home. You can ask Amanda. They have a ton of UK patients who come over to the US for treatment. Many countries in the world are making it very difficult for their citizens to start families, and they're forcing their citizens outside their own boundaries. I mean, reproductive tourism in Europe especially is a climbing, growing industry, and particularly when you're talking about an increase in single mothers by choice and lesbian couples, culturally, we're light years ahead of the rest of the world here in the US. But in Europe and in South America, sort of women are coming into their own and realizing they have these options to start their families without the assistance of a male partner if he's not available.
And one thing I want to ask you as well is about this headline, for instance, on the New York Times. I want to gauge your opinion about it. So it's very simple. One sperm donor, 150 offspring. When you hear headlines like this, you know, what are your first thoughts when you hear these sort of headlines? I mean, it's quite something, isn't it? I mean, should this be something that society allows to have happen, I suppose? Like, should one donor be able to sire 150 children?
My first thought when I see the headlines, I'm really proud that I work for California Cryobank and for people who started this company years ago, keeping in mind that they wanted to limit the number of families using an individual sperm donor. So that would never be something that we have to encounter on a personal level at this company. I think everyone's got to make up in their own mind what they think the appropriate number is. If you go by the standards set by the regulatory agencies, the numbers are very high. They exceed what we would normally expect. Our limits at Cryobank and most of the national sperm banks have adopted the same limits that we have, which is 25 to 30 families worldwide. We don't limit the number of children a family can have, because I don't want to tell you, I'm sorry, you can only have one child because we ran out. I want to let you have as many as you want, but I do want to limit the number of families so the chances of these huge numbers of offspring bumping into each other somewhere in Times Square don't occur.
Right.
Headlines really are designed to grab attention and don't tell you the whole story. And that's not a regular instance, even in other sperm banks that aren't California Cryobank. That number 150 is exceedingly high. Those numbers are usually a result of a small bank that had a limited number of donors and tried to keep as many donors around as long as they could to continue providing services to their patients. But when you choose a sperm bank, it's like choosing a physician or anything else that's important to you, a dentist, a mechanic. You got to choose somebody you trust. You have to make that decision wisely. And you have to do your homework and make sure the bank that you're choosing provides the services that meet your specific needs. And if limits on the number of potential siblings are important to you, then you need to make sure and ask the questions of each bank you look at, what they limit and how long they've been imposing those limits.
Well, I want to thank you, the three of you, for joining me today. I'm sorry that we didn't get onto a whole other side of this conversation, which is obviously from the children's perspective and from the families as well. And it's something that we'll definitely endeavour to get into in the next couple of weeks on HuffPost Live. But for the time being, thank you guys for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And for everybody watching at home, thanks so much for all your comments and your tweets and Facebooks. Please keep them coming. The conversation continues right up on HuffPost Live.